column to the right. 5 miles right. Mark. Right. Mark.
Proud to begin this ceremony here in Old Live Oak Cemetery in honor of these brave and valiant participants in the war between the states. I think it's entirely fitting that we start off with the pavilion as the town of Selma was literally invaded by a foreign army. Not many towns in America can make that claim. Yes, we were all Americans in that war, which makes it so tragic. But folks these days don't seem to understand that there were two countries fighting a war against each other. It was not an insurrection or a rebellion, but it was one country fighting against another. And Selma, the people of Selma, on April 2nd, 1865, faced a horrible instance of history with their town being assaulted by an enemy army. General Forrest spent the night of April 1st having his men go through town, arming the population, finding every able-bodied man, putting them into the works. 3 miles the work stretched from river to river around Selma. Should have taken 10,000, 15,000 men to adequately, 15,000 to 20,000 men to adequately defend those works. Forrest at best could muster only 3,000. Half of those were militia or the citizens that had been armed with muskets and had never fired a shot in anger in all their lives. Old men. Reverend Arthur Small to stand before his grave today. Reverend Small, pastor of Selma Presbyterian Church, took up a musket in defense of his country and fell, mortally wounded, in the Battle of April 2nd. Because of his participation and dying literally within sight of his church, we pay homage to Reverend Small. You also notice the flag over his grave, which is the third national flag of the Confederacy. The flag was not adopted until March 4th of 1865. The Battle of Selma occurred less than a month later. Not many folks recognize this flag because the war didn't last long once it was adopted. But if we still had the Confederacy, barring an act of Congress, this would be our national flag. And since it was the national flag at the time of the battle, we thought it appropriate to have it over Reverend Small's grave. It was the flag of his country on the day he died. In honor of Reverend Small, attention!
Attention!
Gaze!
Italian!
Shoulder!
Forward!
Arm! Present!
Present!
Arm! Shoulder!
Shoulder!
Arm! Now we'll proceed to the next grave. These fine men realize they're doing their Confederate ancestors an honor by showing the ratios that actually occurred in those battles. And we're proud of them for taking that sacrifice. And also there's some real Northerners doing it too, and we're proud for them being here. We'll continue now. Brigadier General Edmund Winston Pettus. The Edmund Pettus Bridge here at Selma is named for him. He was a young lawyer in 1846 when he joined the United States Army and served as a lieutenant in the Mexican War. After the war's end, he became a 49er by journeying to California seeking his fortune. Like so many others, he didn't find any fortune there, and he returned to Alabama and was practicing law in nearby Cahaba when the war broke out. At 40 years old, he was described as 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with a large head. He helped raise the 20th Alabama Infantry and was elected major. 2 months later, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. He saw action in the Kentucky campaign of 1862. There were a lot of men buried in this cemetery that served in his regiment, the 20th Alabama. At the Battle of Port Gibson, Mississippi on May 1st, 1863, while personally directing his regiment in a very tricky withdrawal maneuver, Colonel Pettus was captured. While being marched off to prison, however, he escaped. They marched the prisoners all day. Then after it got dark, the guards told the men to halt and rest. Colonel Pettus was so tired, he laid down behind a log and just about fell asleep. When the guards ordered the prisoners to fall in, Colonel Pettus realized the advantage of his position and stayed right where he was.
No fool.
When the prisoners were marched off, Colonel Pettus let them go by, and then he went back to his own lines and rejoined his regiment. During Grant's May 22nd assault on the Vicksburg fortifications, Pettus's bravery came to light when the Federals had captured an important Confederate redoubt. At Vicksburg, you know that before the siege started, Grant tried to break the lines with a massive assault. They did break through and took one redoubt, such as some of the ones we have at the battlefield. Colonel Pettus volunteered to lead a counterattack, taking 40 volunteers from Wall's Texas Legion. Pettus charged the position, driving the surprise Yankees out, capturing 100 prisoners and 3 sets of colors. General Stephen Dill Lee said it was the bravest act he had ever seen in the entire war, and General Stephen Dill Lee was in the war from beginning to end. After being surrendered and exchanged at Vicksburg, Pettus was promoted to brigadier general. His brigade consisted of the 20th, the 23rd, the 30th, the 31st, and the 46th Alabama Infantry, and remained so for the rest of the war. General Pettus was consistently described as a fearless, dogged fighter and as a soldier of conspicuous bravery as he led his brigade through all the major campaigns of the Army of Tennessee. At Bentonville, North Carolina, in March 1865, General Pettus was severely wounded. He recovered, however, to practice law right here in Selma. And in 1897, he was elected to the U.S. Senate. And he served there until he died in 1907 at age 86. The flag over General Pettus's grave is that of the type that was issued to the Army of Tennessee in February of 1864. This is the flag that most folks think is the Confederate flag. It's certainly a Confederate flag, but it's not the Confederate flag. In fact, when Johnston tried to get his army outfitted in these flags, they ran out of wool bunting and only got half the infantry issued these types. But that increased as the war went on. At any rate, Pettus's brigade, every regiment in his brigade would have been issued, was issued a flag of this type in February of 1864 and carried this type to the rest of the war. In honor of General Edmund Pettus, attention!
Attention!
Brigade!
Battalion!
Shoulder!
Shoulder!
Arms! Present!
Present!
Arms!
Shoulder! Arm!
Battalion, parade,
Parade!
rest.
Before us is the grave of Lieutenant General William Joseph Hardy. His grandfather was a Revolutionary War veteran. He used the spelling H-A-R-D-Y. Of course, spelling was what it was in those days, but in my opinion, you pronounce his name Hardy. I suppose you can pronounce his name any way you want to. He was born and reared in Georgia. Graduate of the United States Military Academy, class of 1838. When he joined the Confederacy in 1861, he had served in the U.S. Army for 23 years. I would think a man who had served in the U.S. Army for 23 years and had risen in the ranks of the officers' corps would take a great deal of reflection to make a decision such as that, to leave the only thing he'd known is practically his entire adult life. That's the striking thing about this war between the states. Men believed in principle, and they believed in that first. And they believed in putting their lives on the line for their beliefs. And that's the legacy we take from these men. That's what we seek to remember here. I don't care who you are. If you'll stand up for principle, you're doing the right thing. Hardy was twice brevetted for gallantry in the Mexican War. In 1853 and 54, under the direction of the U.S. War Department, he wrote his famous drill manual, Rifle and Light Infantry Tactics. The very movements you've seen the men do in this ceremony today come from General Hardy's textbook. And I'm sure he's proud of the way we're doing his movement. After the war broke out, President Lincoln knew he couldn't have his army using General Hardy's manual. So he appointed General Silas Casey to write a manual so that the Union Army wouldn't have to use one that had been written by a rebel. Casey wanted to have field command, and he wanted to cut corners as fast as he could, and besides that, Hardy's manual was a good one. So mainly with a few exceptions, Casey just copied Hardy's manual. So the Yankees and the Confederates are using pretty much the same thing. Even though, as our men know, there were other manuals written too and other variations involved. When his native state of Georgia seceded from the Union, Hardy resigned and was quickly commissioned a colonel in the Confederate Army. He was given command of Fort Morgan, Alabama, early on in the war. And this is where he wrote his Confederate revision to his drill manual. By October of '61, he had been promoted all the way up to Brigadier General, and by October of '62, he's promoted to Lieutenant General. In late '63, Lieutenant General Hardy commanded a wing or a corps in that army and continued to command it in almost every major engagement of the Army of Tennessee. His regiments were easily identified by the distinctive blue and white battle flag of his design. You see an example of such a flag here in the plot before his grave. Since he was an anti-Braxton Bragg general, those of you who study the war know what I'm talking about, he was occasionally transferred to departmental command. But his skill in handling large numbers of troops in the field caused him to be recalled to duty with the Army on campaign. In December of '63, he was offered permanent command of the Army of Tennessee, but he declined in favor of General Joseph E. Johnston. In March of 1865, at the Battle of Bentonville, North Carolina, Lieutenant General Hardy personally led his attacking troops in the last victory of the Army of Tennessee. He suffered personal tragedy, however, as his only son, Willie, was mortally wounded in the battle, literally in front of his eyes. Willie was 17 years old. He had begged his daddy throughout the war to let him come to active service, and his daddy had told him, no, you're too young. Finally, Willie would not be denied and served as an aide-de-camp on his daddy's staff, but was killed in that last battle. After the war, General Hardy moved to Selma with his Alabama wife, who shows he had really good taste in women. And he had married her during the war at Demopolis in one whale of a wedding ceremony, filled with generals, and it's everything that Hollywood would think of to put in a wedding. That's what they were doing. For a change, Hollywood was almost correct. After the war, he continued to live here as a successful businessman until he died at age 58 in 1873. In honor of General William J. Hardy,
Attention!
Brigade,
Battalion!
Shoulder,
Shoulder!
Arm, Present,
Present!
Arm. Shoulder,
Shoulder!
Arm. Behind me at the obelisk is that of Brigadier General John Tyler Morgan. Just before the war, Morgan was practicing law in nearby Cahaba. He represented Dallas County in the state secession convention. That convention, by the way, you ask anybody these days what the vote was, most of them will say unanimous, or 90 to 10, or 99 to 1. The vote was 61 to 39. And had a lot of decision making to make such a momentous decision in that day and age. In April 1861, Morgan enlisted as a private in the Cahaba Rifles. Upon organization of the 5th Alabama Infantry, he was elected major. Spent a year with his unit in Virginia, promoted to lieutenant colonel.
In 1862, he resigned to return to Alabama to recruit a mounted regiment. By August, he had helped organize and equip the 51st Alabama Partisan Rangers. Partisan Rangers was a development by the Confederate government. A lot of fledgling nations tried that in wartime. The U.S. did it in the Revolution. It was to allow the units to outfit themselves because the government couldn't do it, didn't have the resources. And the men could, whatever they captured, they just shared part with the government. Also, it was a recruiting motivation because usually partisan rangers didn't leave the state. But as the war went on and the duty was seen, they knew those men knew they had to leave the state, and they did, and served as regular cavalry units. 51st spent a brief period under the command of General Nathan Bedford Forrest, but was soon transferred to General Joe Wheeler's cavalry command, under whom they fought for the rest of the war. In June of '63, Morgan was promoted to Brigadier General of Infantry to lead one of the Alabama brigades in Virginia. While on his way to Virginia, however, Morgan was informed of the death of Colonel Webb, who was his replacement with the 51st Cavalry. Feeling his men needed him, he declined the promotion and returned to his regiment. Why, men, I've been offered to be promoted and be president of the Confederacy, but I had a feeling y'all needed me. I've just stated my humble rank. Yeah, I'm glad you folks can't see the faces that are looking at me right now on these men. Out of necessity, he commanded a brigade during most of 1863, and in November was promoted to Brigadier General of Cavalry. His brigade consisted of the 1st, 3rd, Russell's 4th, the 9th, and the 51st Alabama Cavalry Regiment. In the late fall of 1863, Morgan led a cavalry division during Longstreet's ill-fated East Tennessee campaign. The summer and fall of 1864, Morgan's brigade operated against Sherman's railroad lines from Chattanooga to Atlanta. In 1865, he was detached on recruiting duty in Alabama and in Mississippi. After the war, he again practiced law. In 1876, when Reconstruction ended finally, Reconstruction in a lot of ways did more harm in the South than the war did. He was elected to the U.S. Senate, a position he held until he died in 1907 at age 83. In honor of General John Tyler Morgan, attention, brigade, shoulder, arm, present, arm. Shoulder, arm.
Falls right. March. Company. 5 falls right. Good job, Bruce. Hey. Face. Order. Arm. Battalion. Hurry. Rest.
Left dress, please. Gentlemen, before me is the grave of Captain Catesby Ap R. Jones. Catesby Ap Roger Jones. The Ap is Welsh and means son of. He joined the U.S. Navy in 1836 at age 15. He became very knowledgeable in ordnance. In 1853, he worked at the Washington Navy Yard with John A. Dahlgren in experiments that led to the improved Dahlgren cannon. In 1856, he served as ordnance officer on board the USS Merrimac, the ship which 6 years later was converted into the Confederate ironclad Virginia, which he commanded. When Virginia, his native state, seceded, Jones resigned from the U.S. Navy. U.S. Admiral David Dixon Porter remarked after the war that he regretted the loss of only 2 officers to the Union service: John M. Brooke, who developed the Brooke cannon right here at Selma, and Catesby Jones. 3 of Catesby's brothers also fought for the Confederacy. A 4th brother, however, Roger Jones, became a general in the Union Army. His maternal uncle was Richard Page, who became a Confederate general and was commander of Fort Morgan during the famous naval battle and siege. I'll have to get some of these Jones descendants here to tell me how long it took after the war for the family to speak to each other again. Jones was instrumental in the development of the ironclad Virginia and was bitterly disappointed when he was made executive officer of the famous ship instead of being given command. However, in March of 1862, the day after the Virginia's captain, Franklin Buchanan, was wounded, Jones commanded the ironclad in her famous battle with the Monitor. When the Monitor broke off the action after 4 hours of fighting, pounding away at each other, only Jones' pilots, who were afraid of running aground from the falling tide, convinced him to not pursue the Yankee ironclad. In 1863, he was assigned command of the new naval foundry here at Selma. It is ironic that his knowledge of guns and gunnery prevented him from getting what he desired most, command of a warship. However, he performed his duty admirably. There was never a shortage of cannon in the Confederate Navy. He also supervised the construction of the mighty ironclad Tennessee here at Selma. In the spring of 1865, with the approach of Wilson's cavalry, Jones, on his own initiative, saved valuable naval war materials by sending them off on freight cars and river barges. He also sent himself off on one of those river barges, I'm sure to make sure that the stores were well taken care of. After the war, he lived in Selma, where in 1877 he was shot dead by a neighbor over a quarrel between 2 of their children. He was 56 years old. We are honored also today to have the granddaughter of Captain Catesby Ap R. Jones present with us today. Madam, if you'll forgive me for giving your age, which I don't really believe, you can't possibly be older than 29, but today is her birthday and she is 97 years old today in the green dress. Melvin. Welcome, madam. In honor of Captain Catesby Ap R. Jones, the band will play a hymn, the naval hymn, I'm sure. Brigade! Shoulder! Out! Present! Out! Shoulder! Oh! Flag over the grave of Captain Jones is that of the first national flag of the Confederacy, which was our national flag from March of '61 until May of '63. That's the flag, the type flag that flew over the CSS Virginia on the day Jones commanded her in the immortal duel with the Monitor. It's entirely fitting that we finish our ceremony here at the main monument in Live Oak Cemetery, built in 1878, one of the earlier Confederate monuments. Around 1908 or so, former Confederate Colonel William C. Oates wrote a book about the war. Colonel Oates said this about the private soldier of the Confederacy, which is what this monument seeks to honor, the private soldier. We've been talking about generals and captains and so forth, and good as they were, they're only as good as their men. Colonel Oates, who was in an awful lot of combat and lost an arm in the war, said this: the private soldiers, the enlisted men, were the life of the Confederacy. When the ranks grew thin, when one of them fell or disappeared with no one to take his place, the Confederacy was one man nearer its end. The majority of these citizens in the ranks, for that is what they were, not regulars, had the intelligence to see and know the disparity in numbers and the resources and appliances of war. And still they fought bloody battles, endured all kinds of hardships and privations, many times marching with bare feet, living on parched corn. What higher proof could be demanded that they were terribly in earnest and were stimulated by the highest patriotism to maintain their God-given right to govern themselves and their own state institution. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to introduce to you the poet laureate of the reenactors of the world, Mr. Ben, as you were, Sergeant Ben Gormley, who will give us an oration from one of his own poems that he created himself.
To recite the Southern Dead, I want to briefly mention and say just a word or two about an old gentleman that was near and dear to all of us. I just found out Friday night, this past Friday, of his passing. Mr. Fred Kennedy, 92 years old, he was a real son, the son of a Confederate veteran. His father, William Foster Kennedy, served with the 10th Alabama Infantry, was wounded in Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. Old Mr. Kennedy, I first met him in Olustee, Florida, about 15, 16 years ago. He was still carrying a rifle then at 70, 80 some odd years old, out on the field. Well, he slowed down some in the last few years, but he was still around. We'll miss him. I can't make my poems happen. They just come or they don't. I was at the house one afternoon back in February working in the garage, and I don't know if it was a premonition or what it was, but this started coming. And I sat down on the porch and I wrote this in memory of Mr. Fred Kennedy. He'll walk beside his father now, as they did so long ago, and speak of battles lost and won, of life and of the foe. He's hugged our wives and daughters and stole a kiss upon the cheek. For all of that, a gentleman, aged, wise, and meek. We'll miss him round the campfire, a vacant place within the ranks. For the honor of him knowing, to God we give our thanks. Uncover. The Southern dead are sleeping in 1,000 Southern glens. The moss and willows beckon with the breath of Southern winds. Though the blood-stained cross of St. Andrew is tattered now and furled, they bore it high on every field and o'er every ocean of the world. It wasn't through their failing that the gleaming turned to rust, and the dreaming of a nation is enshrined within their dust. Some would have their deeds forgot, their monuments swept away. But while Southern blood flows in our veins, those knaves shall never see the day. Teach your children of their story, of battles lost and won. They must keep memories light a-burning till Southern rivers cease to run. The Southern dead are sleeping.
Every year I have to get up here and make a speech to you fellas about the crime. Why, I beg your pardon if I have a little difficulty as I get along in this thing. Now, I look from one end of this line to the other, and there's one thing I see that is more noteworthy than anything else. And that is that there is absolutely no equality in this place. Every single one of you is different and distinct. Every single one of you is valuable to God as you are. Unique, individual, unlike any other human being, unlike any other creature. Look to your left or look to your right. Look behind you, look in front of you. There is no one who is your equal. No one. And yet, the Yankee fought, and I'm glad there are Yankees here to hear me say this. The Yankee fought to preserve a union. The Yankee victory destroyed the union. The Yankee fought to end slavery. The Yankee victory has resulted in the enslavement of every working man in the United States of America today. For 6 months out of the year, you work for the master, if you work at all. And I can give you the numbers that'll show you it's at least 6 months. When you buy something, half of what you buy is taxes that go to some government somewhere. And now in Alabama, our wonderful state of Alabama, the big argument is how to get more money out of the little guy. Trick him. Make him think he can get rich by giving us money. Give him a state lottery. And make the excuse for that lottery education. Look what education's done for this country. In 1861, a sovereign nation was invaded, and liberty was at stake. Not merely slavery for one race, but enslavement for all. At stake was local self-government. The chief of the other side, and I'm going to quote him twice, and I beg your pardon for that. The chief of the other side said that a certain battle was fought to see if government of, by, and for the people could long endure here. They won. We no longer have government of, by, and for the people. We have government of the people, by the mighty, and for the dollar. Here, here. We didn't lose a war. We're still fighting that war. Each one of you keep this to heart. Lincoln said, God must have loved the common man because he made so many of them. No. I challenge him. God loved the individual man because every one of us is an individual man. Not one of us is common. The war continues today. You will reenact on the battlefield out here. One battle 130 some odd years ago. A battle fought by desperate men against great odds. Boys and old men. They couldn't win, but they fought. Don't let anybody tell you you can't win this war today. But the guns today are found not on your shoulders, but in your brains and in your hearts. The weaponry is knowledge. Knowledge. We must teach the future what the past has taught us. And without liberty, there is no freedom. Without liberty, there is no right. God loved the individual man, not the common man. And God made a lot of us. When you finish this battle today, whether you fight for the side that wins or loses in this reenactment, go home to your families and your friends and teach them about the truth that we fought for liberty. We fought for self-government, and we still fight for that against immense odds. But we will win. Remember the great queen of the Britons, Boadicea. She fought the Romans against immense odds. Remember Bruce and Wallace. They fought the British against great odds. The English speaking. Remember Washington and the men ragged and threadbare at Yorktown. They won against the mightiest empire of the world, knew at that time. We face a mighty empire that pretends to give the people greatness. They sell snake oil. What does snake oil do to you when you buy it and use it? It makes you drunk and it makes you sick. Socialism is the snake oil that the enemy tries to sell us now. Home, teach the truth. Keep it always in your heart. Keep it always before you. And do not despair even against immense odds. We will prevail. We will prevail. Thank you, gentlemen. Good luck.
Lion! Again! who in his other life claims to be a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, but we have our doubts. This concludes the ceremony. Battalion commanders take charge of your unit. Parade is dismissed.